Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
At 10 years old, Jacob the lion may have used up more than his 9 lives. The big Ugandan cat is missing one leg and has survived being poisoned by poachers. Now, he and his brother Tibu may have just broken a record for the longest swim by a lion. Oh, and it was through croc-infested waters, too. Alex Brachkovsky is a conservation biologist and wildlife photographer. He's part of a team of researchers documenting the 2 lions. Alex, hello.
Hi, Duncan. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on your show.
Tell us about Jacob and Tibu. Who are they?
Yeah, so Jacob and Tibu are 2 lions that live in western Uganda in a national park called the Queen Elizabeth National Park. It's about 2,400 square kilometers in size. And it's a pretty special park because it's not only lies in the Albertine Rift, which is the most biodiverse, rich park in all of Africa, but it's also right next to the Virunga National Park. So big piece of conservation real estate.
How long have you been following them?
I've been following Jacob on and off for the last 8 years, yeah.
And he has been called a cat with literally 9 lives. Tell us about some of the odds that he's overcome over those years you've been following him.
Yeah, it's really crazy, Duncan, to think that probably your best soap writer in Hollywood could not script something like this. So just to give you a quick 30-second breakdown. So in 2017, when I met him, he was about 2.5, 3 years of age. And at that point, all we knew about him was the fact that he loved climbing these big, gigantic sycamore fig trees in a place called the Shasha Valley. Then basically, a year later, he got caught in a wire snare. It's essentially a device that's used to catch animals for poaching. But he managed to actually get that leg saved by Uganda Wildlife Authority vets. Then, crazily enough, a year later, he steps into another poacher's trap. This time, it's the North American equivalent of a bear trap with that same back leg. It gets completely amputated clean off. 6 months after that, he gets his family poisoned. 6 members get poisoned. His pride gets splintered into 2. About 3 months after that, he gets gored by a buffalo.
Wow.
Basically, his entrails are hanging out of his stomach. A really amazing Uganda Wildlife Authority vet called Dr. Eric Inyel stitched him up, saved his life. Then him and his 2 brothers dispersed north about 75 kilometers. He lost a brother, and now he's made this perilous swim, of nearly 2 kilometers looking for some of the last females in this national park.
And you mentioned the poachers, and I want to get to that, but you tell us about this swim. There's this incredible footage of them crossing this river. How dangerous are these waters?
Yeah, so my cameraman, Luke Osh, myself, Bosco Atukwatsi, and Oren Cornel, we were basically filming these lions on the 1st of February, and we couldn't really believe our eyes when they got in there because we know that the Kazinga Channel is full of Nile crocodiles. So it's a very large crocodilian species. It's much bigger than an American alligator. They get up to 6 meters in size. They can easily flatten an African lion. And there's also a high density of hippopotamuses, which are also known to attack lions when they encounter them in water.
What went through your mind when they entered into the water?
We'd known that they'd swum several times between this area that they lived in called the Kazinga village and Mwea. But we'd obviously never caught it on film. So we were surprised because we saw them make the first few attempts and we were like, man, okay, well, this is serious stuff because they're turning around. There's clearly something pursuing them in the water. But then when they actually went and you see them, in the middle of that channel, it almost looks like they're crossing an ocean. All you see are those little heat signatures from our thermal camera. I mean, we were just like, this is nuts.
And I don't mean to sound this like a joke, but why did the lions cross the river?
Yeah, so this national park, our long-term research that we started in 2017 with the Ugandan government, we've been working with them now for several years, has actually shown that this population of lions in Western Uganda has actually declined by nearly 50% in the last 5 years. But it's not only declined, it's actually the female population that's taken a real hit. So there's actually a sex ratio imbalance. Usually there's 2 females for every male lion. Here you're actually seeing 2 males for every female. So that's what's driving these lions to basically cross across these crazy waters.
They were going in search of female lions.
Exactly, 100%. They were basically trying to secure mating rights and territory.
Okay, explain the poachers. Who is poaching lions and why?
Yeah, so Duncan, I think for your listeners to kind of give a little bit of context, one of the biggest socioeconomic challenges that we have on Earth is trying to figure out how we can economically uplift the communities that live alongside the animals that cause the greatest economic damage and often are the ones that we love the most. So whether it's Asiatic tigers, Asiatic elephants, or African lions, these things can have significant impacts on people's livelihoods. Now, in Queen Elizabeth National Park, you have about 60,000 people living in the national park, spread out across about 11 fishing villages. They're looking for cheap protein. They go and they set these snares, they set these poachers' traps, and you have this conflict between people, lions, cattle. It's basically it's a Pandora's box of sort of trying to live together.
So you said cheap protein. Does that mean that the people are eating the lions then?
So not necessarily directly. I mean, they might if they catch a lion, but they are trying to catch the animals that the lions eat. So it'll be things like Uganda kob, African buffalo, Cape buffalo. It'll be zebras, impalas in some of the parks. So basically any equid or bovine. Yeah.
And how has this impacted the lion populations? What are the numbers now in that park?
Yeah, so in 2018, we estimated that there was 72 individuals left. We now estimate that there's about 39 lions. So that's nearly 50% decline in 5 years.
Boy. Hey, how's that playing out in other African countries?
It all depends where you go, Duncan. So in Kenya, for example, in the Masai Mara, you've got some of the highest densities of lions anywhere in Africa. You're looking at about 17 individuals per 100 square kilometers. There's a good population there. There's about 400 individuals. And ironically, that's about the same size as Queen Elizabeth. You look at the Serengeti National Park doing really well. A lot of Kenya's doing really well. But then, you look at some parts of other African states, so especially West Africa. You look at places like Gabon, Central African Republic. Lions are definitely not doing nearly as well there. Places like Nigeria, they've taken a really big hammering in those places.
Looking at Uganda, what kind of efforts are there being taken to try to stop the poaching?
Yeah, so there's multiple conservation agencies and non-governmental organizations that are working in Uganda. The Uganda Conservation Foundation, Uganda Carnivore Program, the Wildlife Conservation Society's Uganda program. There's our program, the Chambura Lion Project. And there's sort of varying levels of law enforcement efforts and anti-poaching, scientific monitoring. I think one of the biggest challenges in Uganda, and you can basically speak to Peter Lindsay from the Lion Recovery Fund about this, is one of the biggest donors doing lion conservation in Africa, is the biggest issue in Uganda is that a lot of the conservation organizations don't work together. They often work and they operate in isolation, which is actually kind of contradictory to conservation. The biggest problem, Duncan, is that lion conservation is still critically underfunded. So if you have competition between agencies for money, and instead of pooling that money and pooling resources and kind of stratifying their efforts, it's actually quite contradictory to conservation and actually hampers conservation in these national parks.
I can just imagine as you were watching Jacob and his brother swim across the river, the Rocky theme must have been playing in your head. I mean, incredible will to survive of these two animals. What does it tell you, Alex, about these animals and just about how humans are impacting them?
Yeah, Duncan, that's a really good question. So Chad and Hunter, an executive producer who's actually helping us with this documentary biopic about Jacob's life, actually said that, that Jacob is kind of the Rocky Balboa of lions, ironically. I think what his sort of struggle and his kind of life symbolizes is that these animals can take, immeasurable sort of punishment and still come out on the other side fighting and wanting to survive as long as we can help them. And I think that Jacob particularly is a symbol of Queen Elizabeth National Park and more broadly the plight of lions in Africa. So I'm incredibly grateful to you and your platform and others like it that are giving Jacob a proverbial voice. These animals can't speak, and just the fact that your listeners can hear his story already helps us kind of get the word out. Who knows? Eventually maybe the president will come out and take a big stand for saving this national park.
Alex, thanks for sharing Jacob's story with us.
Thank you, Duncan.
Alex Brachkowski is a conservation biologist and wildlife photographer. He's part of a team of researchers documenting the 2 lions.